trauma can create a lot of invisible scars on people that can actually make it really tough to have healthy sex life or healthy relationship life. And as a result of that, a lot of people are wandering around the world with a lot of tension in their bodies and a lot of tension in their pelvic region, a lot of tension in their tissues. And, as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. We haven't had a lot of good solutions until very recently for healing trauma and healing traumatic events.
Welcome to Get Yourself Optimized, a podcast full of secret knowledge that will enable you to reboot and 10x your life. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, author, speaker, online marketer, serial entrepreneur, coach, and a real geek when it comes to biohacking, life hacking, and lifestyle design. What if the missing piece in health optimization isn't found in your diet or exercise routine, but in intimacy with your partner? My guest, biohacking author and speaker Dr. Maloof, returns to share her groundbreaking work with the Adamo Method, a digital sex therapy program designed to measurably improve couples' sexual health and connection. As founder of Adamo Bioscience and author of The Spark Factor, Dr. Maloof brings her expertise in personalized medicine to the often neglected realm of sexual wellness. In our conversation, Dr. Maloof explains how trauma affects the body's capacity for pleasure and connection, revealing techniques that help couples rediscover embodied intimacy. She discusses the neurobiology of love, the science behind pelvic floor breathing, and the importance of putting relationship health first, even before children. Dr. Maloof shares impressive clinical results from her program, including significant improvements in orgasm quality, sexual satisfaction, and measurable increases in romantic love between partners. We explore how safety, attunement, and embodied consent create the foundation not just for better sex, but deeper healing and connection. This episode provides a rare opportunity to understand the physical and emotional mechanics of intimacy. So without any further ado, on with the show. Dr. Maloof, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a bit about what's been happening since episode 391, where you were talking about the Spark Factor. Now you've got this new Adamo Method. What got you into that?
Well, I realized that in the health optimization movement, that health is not just about metabolic health. Our relationships play a huge role in our well-being or our disease. And a lot of people are suffering from poor relationship quality or maybe even have a poor sex life. And as a result of that, their lack of intimacy and connection is creating a lot of unsafety signaling in their home. And our homes are supposed to be our sanctuaries, right? We're supposed to be surrounded by people that we love and trust. And a lot of people get that in their relationships, but there's quite a lot of people in the world that truly struggle in their intimate relationships. And as a result, we see divorce rates that are quite high. And I think part of that is that we don't look at our relationships as an area of optimization. We don't look at our sex lives as an area of optimization. And so, like anything else, things that you don't put energy around, they don't always thrive. So wherever our attention goes, our energy flows. And if our attention is not on having healthy, nourishing relationships, then as a result, we're going to end up with challenges. And I think a lot of people put more emphasis on their home optimization and their cars than they do actually their relational health. And one of the things that separates a romantic relationship from a platonic relationship is sex. And as a physician, I realized that I was very poorly educated in medical school on the topic of sexual health. It just wasn't really a part of our education. And it's briefly covered in the education of residents in family medicine or OBGYN. And so it's just really a missing piece of the health optimization puzzle. And I really wanted to tackle it first head on. I had basically accidentally fixed my sexual dysfunction with, using MDMA with a partner. And it sounds a little irresponsible when you say it out loud, but I didn't fully realize about more than a decade ago, that MDMA had the ability to heal trauma. Now, not every woman who has sexual trauma develops PTSD. About 60 to 80% develop sexual dysfunction, and only 30% develop PTSD from a sexually traumatic experience. But what happens in sexual trauma is the brain gets wired for hypervigilance and fear in a context that's supposed to be safe. So instead of being able to relax into a sexual experience, the body is in a state of hypervigilance and threat. And so it makes it very difficult to achieve orgasm. So I wanted to really figure out why did I accidentally fix my capacity to feel ecstasy and bliss outside of a, altered context. And what was it about that experience that I had with a partner that created such a shift in my brain so rapidly? Now, I'm not by any means in this podcast recommending that everyone goes out and does MDMA, but you live in Israel. And one thing you probably know, and maybe you don't know this, is that a lot of the research done by the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies around PTSD, a lot of those studies were done in Israel. And Israel is actually really very pro psychedelic medicine and research because there's quite a lot of trauma in the Israeli culture. There's a lot of trauma in the Jewish culture. I'm Jewish, and anyone who knows anything about human history knows that there's been a lot of trauma for Jews. And so searching for solutions for healing trauma has been something that has become a very big research area for science. And my company initially started as a pharmaceutical company, and we were really developing MDMA alternatives that were safer and that were designed for intimacy. But obviously, so we're a long ways away from these things getting commercialized. And as it turns out, it's MAPS actually really struggled in their clinical studies to get MDMA approved as a drug for PTSD. But my company all along was basically trying to understand, what is love? How do you measure it? And how do you improve it? And what can actually degrade the capacity to love? And trauma can create a lot of invisible scars on people that can actually make it really tough to have healthy sex life or healthy relationship life. And as a result of that, a lot of people are wandering around the world with a lot of tension in their bodies and a lot of tension in their pelvic region, a lot of tension in their tissues. And as Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. We haven't had a lot of good solutions until very recently for healing trauma and healing traumatic events. And what a lot of people don't realize is that 1 in 4 women are abused as children, 1 in 3 are assaulted in their lifetime, and 1 in 5 are raped. So there's a really, really, really big issue going on. And I think that is affecting a lot of human relationships. So that's really the backstory of why I got into this. Now, what it's merged into is we had to commercialize something because we, didn't want to give up on the mission. So what we focused on was building a new sex therapy. And the Adamo Method is a new sex therapy. It's a digitally delivered program for couples that want to measurably improve their sexual health. So you don't have to have a history of trauma to use this. In fact, a lot of people that went through our program were perfectly healthy couples that just wanted to optimize their sex lives. So we had people that had a history of challenges. We had a lot of people that had a history of sexual dysfunction, and we had a lot of people that were just healthy normals. And what we found was that there was actually a statistically significant improvement in orgasm frequency, orgasm quality, lasting time in men. Um, there was actually improvements in sexual satisfaction across the board, and many other areas of sexual health improved, including sexual communication, sexual confidence. And then we actually measured love through things like the triangular theory of love scale, which is passion, intimacy, and connection. And we actually saw passion and intimacy improve. We already had a committed couple, so commitment stayed the same. But because that was one of the inclusion criteria for this study. So we saw romantic love actually increase by 11% in couples, which was pretty significant. And we also saw there's this basically modern tool to measure love called the inclusion of other, and it's 2 circles that they overlap. And we saw statistical significant standard deviation improvement in emotional closeness. So overall, I'd say we had a pretty successful, drug-free study of our digital sex therapy program called the Adamo Method. And so you're probably wondering, what is this thing that we are doing?
Yep.
Well, what we do is we have questionnaires that people go through to measure their sexual dysfunction, sexual function, sexual satisfaction, and relationship quality and relationship. They're basically their levels of love in their relationship. And then we have people go through both training around their own relationship to their own sexuality, their relationship to their physical selves, their relationship to their emotional, basically there's you can relate to sex both physically and emotionally and obviously spiritually too. But we wanted people to actually have some background understanding of who they are as a sexually sovereign being. And there's this two sort of clear things that we teach people in the initial part of the program, which is sexual sovereignty and emotional, um, basically erotic individuation. So erotic individuation is like, how do you in your brain relate to your sexuality as an individual? So that's erotic individuation. And then sexual sovereignty is, how do you see yourself as a sovereign being that has boundaries and that has a body that deserves respect and deserves to be treated fairly, and has its own desires and needs. And so we talk about sort of your relationship to yourself. And then we go into practices that you can do with yourself to improve energy and blood flow to your pelvic floor, specifically teaching things like pelvic floor breathing and even just having a relationship to their pelvic floor. A lot of people don't even have. Then we go into couples practices where the couples learn to do pelvic floor breathing together, and then they learn essentially a course on penetrative sex. Now, we could have covered things like oral sex. We could have covered things like, manual sex, but we really wanted to cover the thing that we knew there was a lot of problems around, which is when people engage in penetrative sex, a lot of what they experience is sex that they've seen in porn. And for a lot of women, only 68% of women have an orgasm during each sexual experience. And that's largely because there's this huge orgasm gap. Because men are essentially having sex the way that they want to experience pleasure, but that is not the same as what women want. And so a lot of men are kind of flying blind when it comes to female bodies, and they're doing what they see and think is good based on porn. And a lot of women are doing what they see based on porn. And that was me in my 20s. I mean, whenever I had sex, it was a performative act. But performative sex is not connected sex. It's not great sex. It's sex for an audience. And even if the audience is just your partner, that usually leads to a sense of disconnection and disembodiment. You're not actually present for your partner or yourself. And so you're not really engaged in this transcendent experience that sex can be. So what we wanted to do was take basically sexual mechanics and um and then an understanding of the human nervous system and marry that into a program that really taught intimacy directly. And the end result is people have a lot more presence. People have longer experiences with their partner. People are taking orgasm off the table. And so they're, for some reason, having more orgasms because they're more embodied. And we are really proud of just the program we've created. And hopefully in the future, when psychedelics become more, um, when they become part of modern medicine, we'll be able to commercialize the nutraceuticals that we've created as well, which are powerful tools in embodiment and increasing sensation.
Wow. So these nutraceuticals are not part of the program. It's fully
Not
digital.
right now. Unfortunately, we can't commercialize them because they are produced out of controlled substances, but they are evolved I would basically, what I was looking to build was like the safest possible aphrodisiac. And the unfortunate thing is that I made the best aphrodisiac you could ever ask for it for a woman in particular. They do work for men, but they work for women, I would say particularly better because of the way that they were designed. And they were really designed to help close the pleasure gap because basically, there are certain chemical combinations that will help slow a man down, but actually help speed a woman up. And we found that combination. And it's really, 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 really frustrating because I really do think that if we were to sell the combination of the products together, it would just be hugely successful. But we have to follow the government regulations. So we're waiting for policy to catch up, and then we will reactivate the nutraceutical play.
Mm, awesome. Can you
Yeah.
walk us through the pelvic floor breathing? What is that and how does that work?
Yeah. So pelvic floor breathing is so everyone who might be listening might know that they have this thing called a diaphragm. So when you breathe in, you feel your abdomen expand, right? And the thing is that abdomen, that lower, your basically right below your chest is your diaphragm for your breath. It's your diaphragm for breathing. But your pelvic floor also has a diaphragm. So if you actually just put your hand on your pelvic floor, you can feel that there's an entire region that's just made of muscle. So what you do is just like when you're expanding your breath, when you're breathing out, when you're breathing in, you're pushing out your pelvic floor, just like your abdomen's expanding. So there's two diaphragms that are expanding. So you're breathing in and you're pushing out your pelvic floor and then you're relaxing. And so that push of the pelvic floor when you're breathing in, these two diaphragms that are expanding, you're literally directing energy and blood flow to the pelvic floor. And what that's doing is that's actually creating more engorgement and more erection. So women and men both have erectile tissue. Our with female erectile tissue is on the inside and male erectile tissue is on the outside. And so what a lot of men don't realize is that female erectile tissue needs to be engorged through foreplay and through proper breathing practices. But when people are masturbating, people are engaging in their own sexual expression alone. Oftentimes, when we grow up as children, we're taught masturbation is wrong. And so a lot of people, in order to have an orgasm, they tense up. They get really, really, really tense. And so that's carried into the bedroom. But what actually makes for ecstatic sexual experiences is not intense tension, but it's intense capacity to relax the body and be able to let go. And so that letting go and that ability to engorge the blood, basically engorge the pelvic floor, is determined by the breath. So in order to actually create a better sexual experience, you have to breathe. And what we want to teach people is that it's not just breathing with the breath in your chest, but it's breathing with your pelvic floor and it's pushing out. And so what you learn is that when you're doing this during foreplay, you're creating more sensation, more lubrication, more engorgement, and you're literally letting the body relax into pleasure, which is what creates a lot more sensation.
Hmm. And how does this relate to, you mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which
Yeah,
that's kind of a difficult book because there's a
it
lot of
is.
graphic examples in there that are
Yeah.
hard to get through.
So I really believe that sex is a healing modality in itself. If you have a safe partner, if you have a really good relationship, you have a safe partner, sex can be a psychedelic experience. It can be a transcendent experience. It can be a place where you heal existing trauma. Um, but safety is crucial, right? And if a person has experienced unsafety in their sexual lives, starting from childhood to teenager years to college years to beyond, the body will start to guard and it will start to tense and it will start to create armor around itself. And so, one of the things that we do in the program is we teach pelvic floor mapping. And we have people learn how to map the pelvic floor with their fingers or with toys before they even engage with a partner. And there's a really important reason why we engage in pelvic floor mapping is because there's a lot of people who suffer from tension, who suffer from numbness, who suffer from pain, and they don't really even realize it until they bring attention to it. And then they're like, oh my God, there's like so much of my body in this region is not even alive. It's just turned off. And so a big piece of what we're teaching to people is how to do that pelvic floor mapping with yourself and then with your partner, because it can be a really beautiful way of creating knowledge of, okay, so this is what feels good for me and this is what doesn't feel good for me by yourself and with a partner so that your partner can learn to read your body. So a lot of the practices that we aim to teach people in the method are directly related to what's called embodied consent or consent embodied. And so consent embodied means that your body is consenting to the experience. So what we teach people is things like, what does a yes look like when you're open? And what does a no look like when you're closed? And if everyone was taught this as a child, that no means no, you do not try to enter a partner, and that yes means open, they would actually have a lot less sexual trauma happen because a lot of people don't fully realize that a lot of sexual trauma begins in what is a consensual context initially that becomes non-consensual. But if someone has a history of trauma, their body might tense up and freeze in the midst of a sexual experience. And if they can't speak because they're frozen, then what can happen is a person might not be able to read the body cues. And a frozen body is not a body saying yes ever. And so unfortunately, men and even women can do this. When people get really excited, they tend to want to go for what feels good, but they may not be actually tuning in and attuning to their partner. And attunement is really crucial for love because attunement means that you are reading me and you're listening to me without even having me say something. Attunement is really important for parent-child interactions. It's really important for bonding. It's actually how a child grows up and learns to recognize what is safe and unsafe. But unfortunately, a lot of people have experienced traumatic parents who might have abused them. And so the person that was supposed to be safe is not sending them safety cues or attunement cues. And so that gets carried into the relationships and it becomes a really big problem as adults. Um, I don't think we're going to solve every problem through this method by any means. And in fact, I think if you haven't worked on your sexual trauma, you really need to see a EMDR therapist or a psychotherapist to really work who's basically trauma informed. There's a good online company called Redbeard Psychotherapy that has a ton of trained therapists that can do a lot of stuff online. So I would start with that before you do the Adamo method. But I would say that the Adamo method is great if you've already been working on your sexual health and you've already made some headway. And now you really want to say, you know what? I deserve more pleasure. I deserve to have more joy in my sex life. And I'm really ready to physically embark on a journey with my partner to go through this with them.
Yeah, so
Now,
why did you specifically suggest EMDR? So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing over something like tapping or CBT or DBT.
I mean, I think CBT, DBT, tapping, EMDR are all good tools. It's honestly, the truth is, you got to try a lot of different things to find what works for you. For me, I worked with a really great healer named Anthony Lemmy. And you can find him on his website, Anthony, ATHONYLEMME.com. He's like a world-class somatic therapist. There's a bunch of great somatic experiencing people out there. I've done a lot of somatic work, and let me tell you that my nervous system is a different nervous system than it was a decade ago. And it took me a lot of work on my nervous system to get to a point of feeling calm when I wake up in the morning. And for those of you out there that wonder if that's even possible, trust me, it is, but it does take effort. I think EMDR just has fine, it used to be considered quackery a long time ago, but it's actually developed quite a lot of research at this point. And I do think that like starting with something that you can do that's not necessarily going to be triggering is really crucial. I think you need to kind of go stepwise into trauma therapy, but honestly, I wouldn't consider myself a total trauma expert. I do have tried a lot of different modalities. I've done psychedelic medicine, I've done somatic experiencing, I've done trauma release exercises, I've done neural therapy, I've done
I've had
stellate
David
ganglia
Berselli on the
blocks.
show. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. And the thing I would just want to recommend to anyone out there listening that has a history of trauma is that you have to keep working at it because it's no longer traumatizing when you're no longer triggered. And when you go back to this initial trauma and it doesn't activate you, that's your sign that you have been able to heal. Is when you can talk about something and you're not numb to it, but you're not activated to it and you're not dissociated either. So dissociated doesn't count as healing. It turns out, you know, as someone who was dissociated in most of her 20s because of sexual trauma, in my college experience, I know what dissociation looks and feels like, and it's not healing. Healing is truly when you're able to revisit the pain and you're not turned into a triggered mess. And to me, that took me, gosh, if I had been, I wish that I could have listened to a podcast when I was in my 20s and that there was someone even mentioning these possibilities. I think the first step is really, first of all, creating an intellectual framework. And so CBT really does help with that. But intellectual frameworks don't really fix the embodied problems that trauma causes. So you really have to dig into the physical body. And that's where I think somatic therapy is fantastic.
Yeah.
And any type
And
of
for our
somatic
listener who's
practices.
interested in digging further into this, I highly recommend listening to my episode where I interviewed Eileen Smith. She's
Mm,
the author of Moving Beyond Trauma, all about somatic experiencing. That episode and the book is
great.
excellent. Um,
Yeah.
Fred Gallo, EFT expert, tapping expert. That was a phenomenal episode.
I mean, I love
And David
tapping.
Berselli. David Berselli is the creator of trauma release exercises, TRE. And
That's amazing. Oh, you've had them all on your pod.
yeah.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I'm going to listen to all of these. Um, that this is a really, really fortunate podcast to listen to because a lot of people don't even know about these things. And so they're struggling in their relationships, wondering, the thing I've really thought a lot about lately, and this is a kind of a sidebar, and that's that it's not really a sidebar, it's really more of like a thing that you need to think about. So I want people to conceptualize sexual dysfunction in three ways. One is I want you to think about the neurobiology of love. And first is Well, basically, I'm going to explain it through the lens of the neurobiology of love. And there's three facets of the neurobiology of love. And first is the sex drive. So if you have dysfunctional hormones, like you're hormone deficient, you're low on testosterone, or you're low in estrogen, or you're high in, or you're low in progesterone, or you've got estrogen progesterone imbalances, you're not going to have a great sex life because sex hormones determine your sex drive. So first and foremost, a lot of women are going through perimenopause in their 40s and they have no idea what they're doing because only 5% of doctors are properly trained and hormonally informed and properly know how to do hormone replacement. That's first. And the second thing is, it's just a lot of men that have low testosterone and don't even get proper treatment for it. So there's things like Clomid and there's things like testosterone replacement. And I think if you're a young man, you really don't want to do testosterone replacement. You want to do like more like Clomid because you don't want to shut off your HPG axis. Then the next step is the actual relationship to your partner, the lack of passion. A lot of people have been married for a few years and then there's no passion left. But the romantic love drive is largely driven by dopamine, first and foremost, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is like the stress hormone that's like, I can't stop thinking about this person. I'm obsessed with them. Can't eat, I can't sleep. And then serotonin's like, oh man, I feel so warm and fuzzy with this person. They are so great. They make me so happy. And dopamine's like, they are significant. They matter. They're important. This person is really, really meaningful. And you need all three to feel passion. So, what do you do if you've already kind of gotten habituated to your partner? Well, you do things with them that activate those hormones. So, you actually activate novelty. You do novel experiences. You do novel things together. You go to new places together. You put yourself in new contexts with them and you experiment with creating the conditions for those hormones to be released rather than expecting your partner to necessarily release them for you. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people are taught. And then the third thing and I guess that's for part of the middle thing is the rediscovering of your partner. Like a lot of people think that they know their partners, but actually you have to keep getting to know them and keep discovering new things about them and realizing there's unending novelty in a person if you're actually interested in them. So part of it is a desire. You have to create the desire to be interested in this person rather than go find your interest somewhere else. Because that's going to actually degrade your ability to have passion and love with this person because it's going to degrade trust and it's going to degrade commitment. And so that's the next piece is trust and commitment. So oxytocin, crucial for bonding. It's crucial for relationships, crucial for attachment. A lot of people have never done attachment work. And so if they don't do work on their primary attachment wounds, it's going to be really tough for them to have a great sex life with their partner because they're going to keep rubbing up against their attachment wounds, which is not sexy. Unfortunately, it's really painful. And so if you struggle with commitment and intimacy, you may need to focus on your avoidance. If you struggle with nervousness and anxiety, you may need to focus on your anxious attachment wounds, or maybe you've got a disorganized attachment wound pattern. But the commitment piece is also really crucial for creating a great sex life. So typically becomes more problematic early in the relationship until you've created that secure base.
Yes.
So
By the way,
this is just
I have a great episode of to going into this avoidance and to anxious attachment and the
who was
avoidant
on
and
it?
so I've done several. One was with Harville Hendricks and
Oh, amazing.
yeah, another one was with Dr. Gottman
Oh
and
my
actually
gosh. You've
both.
literally had all of the best, Stephen. I don't know how you do it, but you've really been able to get some of the best thinkers in the world on your podcast. So I am so excited to dig into your podcast more. I'm like really, really stoked to listen to all these episodes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So
Yeah.
I know we're getting close to time, and I do want to touch on something that I think is kind of a hot button, especially in this high-tech time that we're living in, and that is porn. Porn
Yeah.
is poison. Porn
Yeah.
is absolutely toxic to everything, to
Well, it's
your
poisoning our culture
motivation.
around sex,
Yeah,
you know?
it destroys intimacy. It destroys motivation. It destroys your spiritual connection to
Yeah.
your higher power. It's just awful.
It also actually really affects your sex life. So when people get habituated to the dopamine hit of porn and the novelty of the weird stuff that they're exploring in porn, unfortunately, you're never going to be able to find that in a person because no person can satisfy. the multitude of what you see in a digital format. So as a result of watching excessive amounts of porn, it actually degrades your capacity to feel romantic love to your partner because you're getting so much dopamine from the pornography that you're not going to get nearly as much from your partner because you're used to them. So, I went to a conference around sexuality, and there was a big argument at the conference that porn is not as bad as people say it is. But I think that I think that that's up for argument, right? Like, um, there was an argument by this psychologist that men who watch porn are more committed to their relationships, but I would
That's
say that
BS.
they're probably what's actually happening is they're not actually addressing the elephant in the room, which is their sex lives are suffering because and they're turning to porn because they're not addressing their sex lives. And this gets into another topic, which is like there's actually been papers written about this topic, which is um when women have children, their brain gets fundamentally rewired, and it creates the conditions where a lot of their focus goes to keeping a child alive. And unfortunately, when the focus is completely on your child, this can become a really big problem for a relationship. So the one thing I will leave people with is like you actually have to invest in your relationship first. So like I was reading this great Wall Street Journal article about relationships, and it's that you need to put your mask on first, and then you need to address your partner's needs, and then you address your children's needs. But unfortunately, our culture has created a complete focus on children. And when people become parents, they overlook their own needs and they overlook the needs of their partner. And so it's not surprising that a lot of parents are struggling with their relationship because their relationship is not a priority. And as a result, they end up seeing their kids are flourishing, but they're actually a lot of times their kids aren't flourishing because the parents aren't happy. And my parents really showed me this firsthand. Like I never saw my parents put us above them. They were always like their relationship was primary. We were always secondary. And my parents are still married, and my sisters are all in healthy relationships. And I think I mean, they're also very successful women. And I think there's something to be said about flipping the switch on the focus, right? Like if you are not taking care of your biology and your health, how are you supposed to show up for your family when they need you? If you're not taking care of your partner sexually, they might turn to porn or having an affair. And I think we need to look at our sex lives as a healthy part of maintaining a phenomenal relationship as we get older.
Mhm.
And honestly, I think that like Gottman and a lot of and Harville Hendricks and a lot of these great relationship gurus are phenomenal when it comes to teaching the intimacy piece. But you really have to understand the sexual mechanics too, because you may be having sex with your partner for a decade and they have never had an orgasm with you, and you may not even know it. And this happens, by the way. And I've met women who've gotten divorced specifically because they got so sick of having sex with their partner because they weren't getting their needs met.
Mm.
So I don't want to be brutally honest here, but I do think that as a culture, we need to look at sex like we do our fitness or our nutrition or our environmental health or our air quality in our house. It's literally fundamental to our ability to thrive and survive in this world. And I just don't think it's prioritized enough. And I think if it were, we'd just be, I mean, oxytocin is an anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant. It protects your heart, it protects your brain, and it protects your mitochondria. And so, why wouldn't we want to have more orgasms? Because it's going to actually give us a more youthful existence.
Yeah. And it's like an experience of God. It's
It's
an it's
experience of connection to God, and it's part of a sacred marriage.
mm,
Like I really think that if you really engage in deeply connected, intimate sex, it's not what you see in porn. It's a lot. Honestly, if you want to read some great books on the topic, there's two really good books I would recommend. One is called Magnificent Sex. One is called Transcendent Sex. And there's even a really cool book called Slow Sex that I really like. I also recommend the courses by Aaron Michael and Saida Desalegn, who are the co-creators of the Adamo Method, largely based on their careers and their luminaries in the space. Um, they're phenomenal thinkers, and I think it would be great, guests of your podcast at some point because they can really go into the depths of understanding sex as a sacred practice.
mm, amazing. All right. Well, I know we're out of time. This has been amazing
Thank
and
you so much for having
inspiring.
me.
And if our listener wants to, or viewer, they want to work with you, they want to go through the Adamo method, how do we get them in touch?
Yeah, just go to www.livingadamo.com. It's extremely affordable. It's cheaper than a sex therapist, even though we actually do recommend if you are struggling with really significant difficulties in your sex life, that a sex therapist is a great way to go too. But this would be used as an adjunct to that. So a lot of sex therapy is they don't really teach sex therapists sexual mechanics. And so it's a lot of psychological work. And this is going to cover both the psychological and the physical relationship to sex with your partner.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right.
And I can't wait to listen to your rest of your pod. Thank you so much for those
Thank you.
recommendations.
And thank you, listener. Go out there and make it a fantastic week and do something amazing for your partner and learn this stuff and apply it in your life. We'll catch you in the
Thank you
next
so much.
episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off. Want to hear more from Dr. Molly? Then check out my previous interview of her, episode 391, at getyourselfoptimized.com/391. If you want to hear more conversations like this on sexual wellness and relationship transformation, then I recommend episode number 1 with Miss Jaya, episode 119 with Lawrence Lanoff, episode 382 with Justin Gottlieb, and episode 480 with Scott Berry. Also, I invite you to check out the show notes, transcript, action-based checklist, and all the URLs mentioned in this interview with Dr. Molly Maloof at getyourselfoptimized.com/512. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share this episode and, more importantly, the entire show Get Yourself Optimized with a friend. Change a life and help me spread the light. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Get Yourself Optimized. Nearly a decade ago, I started a journey that completely transformed my personal life and my business. Now I'm taking on a very select number of high-caliber coaching clients and personally helping them optimize their lives. I have limited spots, so if you're interested, go now to getyourselfoptimized.com and apply for one-on-one coaching or for our high-level mastermind. By the way, if you have any questions or comments whatsoever, email me at host@getyourselfoptimized.com. See you next week.